you're going to open up a endless amount of possibilities for your photography. Okay, real quick, like I did a few videos ago, for any new viewer or viewer that sees my videos a lot, just double check that you're subscribed and make sure that little subscribe button is clicked, and that way you'll get notifications and all that stuff. I know a lot of times I'll see a lot of videos from people I like, but I'll realize at some point that I never subscribed. YouTube just knows what I want by this point. So just check and see if you're subscribed, and I invite you to do so if you're a new visitor. I appreciate it. One of the reasons that I like, and a lot of you like, Fujifilm gear is the throwback element to it, the vintage vibe, the turning back the clock, so to speak, of many aspects. One being the tactile element of these cameras, where you have at the very least oftentimes a shutter speed dial, you have an actual dial for exposure compensation, and you have aperture rings on the lenses themselves, and on some cameras you even have an ISO dial. So we like that throwback to the old school film days. We also admire and like and try to create oftentimes a vintage look, a look that also came from those vintage film days, the old school film days. Today we're going to talk about one of the most important tools in a photographer's arsenal to achieve a vintage vibe in your photographs. A lot of us talk about trying to mimic film, the look of film, with digital. We try to adjust color in Lightroom, to adjust contrast, to give it a vintage vibe. We use Fujifilm film simulation recipes that I create, a lot of other people create, to achieve a vintage film vibe. So we go about this in a lot of different ways with that end goal of having an image that gives the feeling that it was shot on film, or at least an image that was created in that time when film was the main photographic tool. And there are a handful of paths to get to that point of having a finished image that kind of has that vibe to it. What I hear a lot of the past year and a half is people comparing the ability of different camera bodies, specifically in the Fujifilm lineup. They compare the specific camera bodies and how well one kicks out a vintage image better than the other, or vice versa. Some people feel that the XE1 and the X-Trans 1 has the most Filmic-like look, and some people think that the X-Trans 2 has the most Filmic-like look, and so on. So it depends on who you ask, and it depends on which video you watch, and all these things. And on the opposite side of that, some people feel like anything newer than these, like the XT20 or Max H1 or the XT3, XT4, and so on, that those can't create a vintage vibe, that they feel too clinical. Clinical is a common word I've heard lately, I guess meaning that they're too sharp or the colors are too accurate, maybe. I'm not quite sure. I want to talk a little bit about my view on this whole thing, and tell you one of my biggest tools that I have to create these vintage looking photographs. The photographs that when I go to my computer, I look at them, and I honestly have to look at the EXIF data to remind myself what camera situation I shot that on, because sometimes I'm able to achieve a really cool vintage vibe with almost any of these Fujifilm cameras, regardless of what sensor. I've shot with the XE1 now for 4 months. Yeah, a solid 4 months, I guess. And it's a really, really solid camera, really great camera. And I don't want to be a broken record here, but I don't think the X-Trans 1 has anything special about it. I think there's differences between the X-Trans 1 and X-Trans 2, but they're really subtle. The X-Trans 1 and X-Trans 2 are both 16 megapixels. They both have a lot of similarities. The processor difference between the two might render color slightly differently, but they're both capable of shooting cool vintage vibe images. They're both capable of shooting super sharp and color accurate images. So they're very, very similar. So I don't think the XE1 or X-Trans 1 sensor cameras offer anything super special. Like I said, they can and definitely have produced some really cool images, both RAW and JPEG, and some have some really cool vintage feel to them. But I'm not going to talk about them as the answer to achieve that vintage vibe, because if you have a newer camera or a camera of a different brand, you can still achieve that. So the crux of this video may seem obvious, but I still want to talk about it because I still think there are some new photographers or photographers that underestimate the importance of the role the lens plays in this whole equation. And one of the ways I achieve my vintage looks is through the lens. That's one of the huge, if not the biggest aspect of creating something like that, creating an image that feels like it was shot on film, feels like it was shot on an old school camera, is using glass that creates that look. That look comes a lot from the glass, because when you're talking about that look, there are multiple aspects to that. There is sometimes that means a little less sharp, which either can come from the lens or just come from the fact that the shot was slightly out of focus. But the lens oftentimes creates that, whether it's because it's soft, wide open, or there's an area of the lens where it's soft. Sometimes the vintage photographs have slightly lower contrast. That can be achieved through the lens you choose, and the same thing goes with color rendition and whatnot. Also, obviously, is the bokeh, or how the out of focus areas render on a lens. All these things, all these characteristics of these lenses result in the what the image looks like. And the images that we chase, these film images that we chase, a lot of them obviously were shot on lenses like this Nikkor 50mm 1.4. So, and if you put this on our Fujifilm cameras, they're going to create a similar image, not the exact same because we're not shooting on film, but they're going to create a similar image. Some of the characteristics of some of these old school lenses is less than perfect corners, less than perfect sharpness outside of the center. These lenses sometimes have flaws like this that we've come to accept as part of the style, and that's what we try to create. And that's why it's asking too much of a sensor to do that all. The sensor and processor can only do so much. You can take the XE1, put a vintage lens on it, and achieve a really filmic-like image. And then you can take the XE1, put one of the brand new lenses from Fujifilm that's super sharp, and you can create a really sharp, clinical looking image on it as well. So with that in mind, that's why I like putting lenses like this Nikon on my Fujifilm cameras. The Nikon lenses aren't super cheap now. They have gone up, but they're still not as expensive as a brand new Fujifilm lens, and they're not expensive. They're not as expensive as a lot of other higher end film camera lenses as well. But you can get a lot of old school film lenses, vintage lenses. And if you haven't checked out Mark Holtz's channel, I'll link to that below. But Mark Holtz has countless videos on vintage lenses. It's a treasure of those kinds of videos. Go check those out. He has a ton of reviews there. Will give you some great options for other vintage lenses that I haven't even tried yet. But another option to achieve this end goal of using this vintage style glass to achieve this film look, this vintage look, this non-clinical look that a lot of us are going for, is using these lenses that are from Pergear, TTArtisans, TTArtisans. I haven't tried the rest, I'm not quite sure. But with some of these brands like this Pergear lenses, obviously they're not Nikkor, but the glass layout and design of some of these Pergear, TTArtisans, and TTArtisans lenses kind of mimic the vibe and feel of some of these lenses. And whenever I'm shooting with this lens, this Pergear 35mm f1.2, in a lot of situations I can get an image that does remind me of shooting with these Nikkor lenses. I'm not saying they're the exact same by any stretch of the imagination. I'm saying because of the glass element layout and the design and the lack of the same coatings that the newer lenses have, the lack of that coating helps create the certain atmosphere to the images that these lenses create. And you can get this Pergear lens and some of these other lenses for less than $100. Some are a little over $100, but still a lot of them fall within that price range. And one of the reasons I wanted to make this video is to remind you that there are different ways to achieve that look that you're going for. If you're going after the vintage vibe look, if you're going after that filmic look, that film-like image, there are different ways to achieve that, and the lens being one of the most, if not the most important tools or choices you're going to make in trying to achieve that. There was a couple people online a few months ago that sold newer cameras to buy the X-Trans 1 cameras, and I think part of the reason is that they were chasing that film look and they thought that the X-Trans 1 was going to help them achieve that. And yes, it has maybe a unique look if you're doing a side-by-side comparison, but unique and different, not better, and definitely not more filmic. The X-Trans 1 and X-Trans 2, the differences are subtle. The biggest thing you can do to achieve that look, regardless of what X-Trans sensor you have, is the lens. I've shot images on the XT20 or XH1 that look like film to me, and these are 24 megapixel sensors that in theory can be super sharp corner to corner and have that clinical look if I choose to, if I decide to create that. But I can get that filmic look on these cameras because of the lens I choose, the lighting situation, and the settings of the camera and the lens and everything that goes together. That's how that happens. And the recipes that we choose, that helps, sure, if you're trying to go for JPEGs that come out of the camera like that look a little more like film. All that plays into it. It's part the sensor, part the camera, part the processor, part the settings you have for the recipe, but also huge part is that lens, the tool itself that's capturing the light, that's either creating a super sharp clinical image or it's creating an image that has flaws, organic flaws, analog flaws, the flaws or characteristics or atmosphere that you're chasing from these film images. The lenses are a key part. So I know for many of you, I said a lot of obvious things in this video, and that's fine. But I hope some people will watch this and start thinking about this and really analyzing, what to prioritize when you're trying to achieve a look like that. And There are a lot of cheap, affordable options to get you a lens that will give you this look. Adapting old lenses is one of the easiest ways to go. You can find go to a thrift store and see what manual focus lenses that they have on some old film cameras or whatever, and find the adapter for that lens and give that a shot. Go on eBay or KEH or Use Photo Pro and see what manual focus lenses they have there and adapt those and experiment. It's one of the most fun things you can do with these mirrorless cameras is to explore manual focus lenses with adapters. You're going to open up a endless amount of possibilities for your photography, regardless of which X-trans sensor is sitting in your body. You can create Filmic-like images with all of them, and that's the bottom line. Regardless of what digital camera, and almost regardless of what digital brand you're using, you can choose the right lens, experiment, and create some awesome Filmic-like images. But that's it for now. I just wanted to talk about this idea and this concept of creating a Filmic-like photograph utilizing lenses like these. So I thank you, like always, for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.